Hi, everybody. How is everybody doing tonight? And welcome. This time I
Hello.
have Kim in my house.
Hello. Tell me if my sound is as good as it usually is, because I'm using a different microphone. So, yeah.
Yep. I had to get on my thing so I can be my own mod. So this is Kim from My Other's Keeper, and in the description below is her YouTube channel. So I hope everybody will go and subscribe. And when they're coming on in here, give a like. We tried to do it on both channels, but we couldn't figure that out. So maybe one of these days we'll be YouTube savvy and get that done. But I wanted to bring Kim on, first of all, because it is bipolar. And I didn't even know this. She told me this. It is Bipolar Awareness Day, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And she struggles with that.
No, I
And
don't. I live with it. I love through it, and I view life through its lens, but I don't suffer from it.
that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I guess from my point of view, I always saw my grandmother struggling with it.
And she may well have been. Yeah. Yeah.
So we thought it was a good thing for Kim. I want her to be able to tell her story, but I also wanted to be able to give the other part of it, which is to love somebody through it, which cannot always be the easiest thing, especially when they're undiagnosed and they're unaware of it. It's not very easy. So we thought it would be a very good perspective of someone who's more knowledgeable about it than I am, but kind of being able for me to walk through some of my memories with my grandmother. So I'm going to let Kim take the show for a minute and tell
Okay.
tell her story and her perspective of how she looks at somebody that is living with bipolar.
Okay. So had I realized, I would have made a um my name's Kim, and I have bipolar type 2, and I will actually just create a little chart here. Sorry, I'm going to become a teacher here for a moment. Doopy 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 doo. Actually, Mary, I'm going to get you to take me off the screen. I'm going to run and get some of my teaching supplies. I will be right back.
Okay. Now I'm big again. um, let me just tell a little bit. My grandmother, her name was Nancy, so I will tell you a little bit of a fun story to some degree. Not fun story, but the reason for the short that I picked and the title of the song that I chose was because one of the very, very happy memories I have with my grandmother was when we used to go up to Daytona. I used to spend the night with her and have a sleepover. And she woke me up at 2:00 in the morning and said to me, come on. And she got me up and we went through to the living room and watched Elvis Presley's Love Me Tender, which I can't watch today. And we sat on her couch eating black licorice and watching Love Me Tender. So that was one of the reasons why I picked that song for my short, is because when I listen to that song, I think of that really special memory where I thought my grandmother was the coolest to wake me up in the middle of the night and go watch Elvis Presley's Love Me Tender on the television. So give me a thumbs up, Kim, when it's good to come back in. Okay. So here's Kim back, but that's why I chose that song, because it was a very sweet memory.
That is a very sweet memory, and that is, it's not uncommon for somebody with bipolar disorder to do something kind of irrational or word I'm looking for has escaped me, spontaneous, especially when they're in a high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of drawing for you. Okay, so can you see this? Everybody has regular days. Okay, just normal, average, everyday days. Then there are two psychosis lines. I'm going to move my everyday days a little higher. There in the middle, there are two psychosis lines. One negative, or one depressed, one manic. Okay, can you see that well?
Yes.
You can see that? Okay. So if you have had, up top here is called manic, down here is called depressive, and that's why it's bipolar. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So, oh, I'm going to turn it sideways so that it's not so glary. Okay, so there we go. That's better. So if a person has been here and then has gone above the psychosis line, I don't know if you can see that. I will use a different color marker. Sorry, I didn't think to do this before we had.
That's okay.
Okay, so if you've been up here and you've gone up here above the psychosis line, that means you have bipolar type 1. Well, let's just do a 1. Bipolar 1. And then you've gone down, and sometimes you've gone down to just regular. Sometimes you've gone down to very depressed, possibly suicidal at this point. And sometimes you will have gone down as far as the psychosis line down here. Now, psychosis line up here sounds like a lot of fun until you get to the point where you think you can fly and you jump off the nearest building and you actually try to fly. That doesn't work so well. I have a friend who thought federales were after, we're in Canada, he thought federales were after him, and he went to the top of a local bank and was throwing rocks and cement owls down at people, trying to get the federales off of him. So he was up here in this level of psychosis. Down here is, again, that's where suicide ideation and suicidal attempts happen. And down below the psychosis line, that's where you think demons are trying to eat your brain. That's where the scary, delusions, hallucinations, all of those things happen. Okay, that's bipolar type 1. Bipolar type 2 will go from typical. I hate the word normal, just so you're aware. They will go from typical and live hypomanic. So hypo just means underneath, like hypodermic for a needle. So we will live hypomanic for a period of time, and we will have gone down and possibly had suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, that sort of thing down there. Sometimes, rarely, will you go down below the psychotic line. Okay. The psychotic line generally is the best way to decide between bipolar type 1 and bipolar type 2. Okay. So, to recap, bipolar 1 has gone above the top psychotic line at least once in their lives. It doesn't have to happen many, many, many times. At least once. Bipolar type 2 will have been hypomanic at least once, usually 2, 3, or 4 times in their lives. The duration must be, for above the psychosis, must be a duration of, I believe it is 24 or 48 hours, because that is extremely dangerous. They don't want you to stay up there for long at all. Okay, people die up there. Down here, I lived for years up here. And then every now and then I would dip to down here. And every now and then I would dip to down here. So my life for about 3 or 4 years was up in this hypomanic stage where everything is wonderful. Okay, so now let me describe, now you know kind of the very basic bones of what it looks like to have bipolar disorder. Okay, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share this little PowerPoint present. Oh wait, no, that was wrong. Okay. Um, okay, so there's the teacher Kim in me right there. So what does my type of bipolar look like? My bipolar, I have bipolar 2. I never say I am bipolar 2 because I do not encapsulate every person with bipolar. My experience is I have bipolar 2. Okay. So my experience with bipolar 2 is to, before I was diagnosed, before I knew anything was wrong, I was about grade 7 or so. Now let me go back even to as a kid, a little kid. So I was born at a very young age. I started that joke with one of my therapists, and she's like, well, so how old were you when you were born? I'm like, dude, I was a baby. Anyway, it was a joke. But anyway, I believe I was born about a month late, to tell you the truth. Ah, 7th. Your son has been diagnosed with bipolar type 2. Yeah. Let us know in the chat how recently he's been diagnosed and possibly what some of his symptoms are. So I was very happy-go-lucky. I was one of those kids who was just kind of like sparkle and shine, but I was a lot more comfortable around the adults than I was around other kids. I just felt more at home there. So then as I was getting older, we moved a lot and I became more and more introverted because every time we moved away from one place to another, everybody already had their friends. They didn't need new friends. So I just kind of went more and more introverted as we went on. And that was, we were moving a lot because my father was alcoholic and he would lose jobs very regularly. He was abusive and he was abusive by nature. So he would be very mean or cruel to other people at work. And I think that really influenced whether or not he had a job. So those type of things were why we moved so much. Then when I was in about grade 7, we were living in East Central Alberta in a teeny weeny little itty bitty 200-person town, which doesn't matter. But I was running home from school down the sidewalk and I tripped over something on the sidewalk and I hit the front of my head really hard. At that point, we knew nothing about concussion and the concussion effects and that kind of stuff. But the frontal part of your brain is what controls your mood. So that was really affected. After that point, I can really remember depressions, panic attacks, really, really low periods setting in. Every now and then I would have a hard time sleeping and I wouldn't sleep for a day or two. But then I would get very sick and I would need sleep in order to be able to make myself not feel sick anymore. So I was just overtired. And then life just kind of kept going that way till I was about 16 years old. My parents split up because my father was arrested for his sexual abuse of my sister, which had been going on for quite a few years by that point. And my mom, who didn't know, she had that beaten woman syndrome. She didn't know that she could survive without him. So until she was forced to leave, she didn't. And he wasn't physically, no, I won't even say that. It wasn't like we got regular beatings. He was emotionally and psychologically cruel. And so that's kind of how I grew up. So anyway, I was about 16. My parents split up. They finally got divorced. And at one point during that year, I was sitting at home and I just kind of looked like, Mom, I was sexually assaulted when I was 4. And she's like, what? What are you talking about? So I explained, oh no, I remember every hook, line, and sinker, every nook and cranny, everything about it. I hadn't remembered it until I was 16 years old. My mind had repressed it all of those years. And at the time when I was 4 years old, um, I also accepted Jesus into my life as my savior, because when I was 3 till 4, my mom had to go, and she would have to work. My dad was at work, and for about 30 minutes, or maybe even less than 30 minutes, I had to be alone in the house. And when you're 3 years old, you don't know the difference between 30 minutes and 16 hours. You just know that you're alone. And I was scared. So
Really
we were
so.
watching Billy Graham on the TV, and I was 4 years old. And Billy Graham was talking about a God who is with you no matter what. He was with you when you were awake and when you were sleeping. Even if there were bad things going on around the corner, he would be there to protect you. That's what I needed. So I prayed, Jesus, even though you're really big and I'm only little, can you please come into my heart? I didn't ask Jesus into my life because I was afraid of hell. I didn't ask Jesus into my life because I knew I was this terrible sinner. I knew that I needed protection, and the only one who could do it was God. So
Amen.
that's the beginning of my salvation story. So now, I gave my life to Jesus when I was 4. I was sexually assaulted when I was 4. I believe that God protected my brain from all of that trauma that could have just manifested so badly in my head at that point. So again, I was 16. My parents got divorced. I made this realization. Um, Again, I have to back up a little bit. When I was in grade 8, I think I was about 13 years old. So this is after I'd hit my head. My dad and I were fighting, as we regularly did. And so we're standing at the kitchen table and screaming across the table at each other. And I finally said, "So what do you really think about me?" He's like, "I wish you were never born."
Oh,
Just
goodness.
what every 13-year-old girl wants to hear, right?
Yes.
So I went to his office, and I had a small razor, and I started to cut my wrist. And I knew that cutting across doesn't do anything. Cutting this way does. It cuts more thoroughly through. Sorry, trigger warning there. I don't mean to scare people. But so I started cutting, and God brought a song to my head called "I'm Giving Up, Giving Up." I'm going to stop kicking myself around, swimming in a pool of pity. I'm going to lift my feet up off the ground and get back to the nitty gritty, because it's one step, 2 steps, then I'm back on my way. And I just get goosebumps every time I think about that song. And it's still on my playlist because I just love it. Anyway, and it's talking about how God keeps you going even when you can't on your own. So for me, my relationship with God is the reason that I have a life today, the reason I have sanity today, the reason I have almost anything today, because that relationship is 100% precious to me. Okay, so where was I at? Attempted suicide, grade 7. Okay, so so when my parents split up, my mom and I moved from Alberta to Saskatchewan, and we lived in a small town, kind of northish, not terribly far north, but northish in Saskatchewan, to the place where she was born, actually. And so she moved close to her family, and I moved to this school that was about 3 times the size of any school I had ever gone to. And I decided that being a good Christian kid who never broke the rules and who always wanted to do these things got me nowhere. So let's see what being bad could do. And it got me there faster. So I ended up dating quite a few guys. I was very sexual. I was hypersexual, actually. So that means it was like anywhere, anyone. I don't have a problem admitting that, because I know that the sick brain that I had, it was not my actual normal nature. it was, I also had a very, very low self-esteem because I was told my whole life that I wasn't worth anything, worth nothing. And I had been sexually assaulted a few times by that point. So it wasn't just the one time, it had happened a few times since then. My father attempted to touch and tried to groom me, but he was so late in grooming me because he had been grooming my sister for so long and had been paying so much attention to her that, again, God protected me through a lot of what could have been incredibly disastrous in my life. So by the time Dad got to me, I was stronger, I knew better, and I had more confidence than my sister did because he started on her when she was so young. But I was still had that mindset that really all I was worth was what I could do for a guy. That's was worth. So I decided to do it. And something with that people don't realize. Yeah, exactly. He was too, and he almost encouraged being male. Hypersexuality is normal. See, I was called a slut. You would have been called a hero, right? And that's just the way it is. So when you have bipolar disorder, those thoughts that go through your head don't seem crazy. It's like, oh yeah, okay, that's a good idea. It's like you've been drinking and you're drunk, but you're at that level of drunk where everything is really fun and cool. That's what it was like for me for years. So I was doing things that were dangerous to me as a human being, dangerous to others around me, but I didn't realize the danger that I was in, that I was putting others in. So I started dating a guy who was 5.5 years older than me. I was 17, 18 years old at that time. And he would have been 22, 23 at the time. And had these things been going on now, that would have been considered statutory rape. At the time, it wasn't in Saskatchewan, but now it would be. Again, you're underage, you can't consent. Not only that, but I had a mental illness that was changing the way my brain was working. So, while I was engaged to that guy in grade 12, I had been studying for my English final exam. And I looked down at my notes and I'm like, okay, I don't remember this. I don't remember this. I don't remember this. Oh, wait. I couldn't even recognize my own handwriting. My brain was so confused at that moment. So I decided that I was such a waste as a human being, like my dad said, that I'd be better off gone. And not only that, my mom would be better off if I wasn't there to hold her back. Because after all, because she lived with me, she had to have 3 jobs. Because I was such a waste as a human being, my sister couldn't move forward with her life. I had only lived in this community for a year or less, so people around me wouldn't know me well enough and wouldn't really be sad. My boyfriend oddly wanted nothing to do with me because, I mean, why, you know? And so I sat down on the kitchen floor and I again started to cut my wrist. And then my dog came and she laid her head on my lap and licked away the wound. And I looked at her and I realized she would never understand if I was gone. So my dog saved my life that time. Yep, doctor shopping when you have bipolar disorder is not unusual. Sometimes doctor shopping is helpful if you're not getting a proper diagnosis. And sometimes doctor shopping is harmful if you want a diagnosis, a certain diagnosis, and the doctors just aren't going there. So you have to be a little careful. But autism and bipolar can resemble each other in certain ways. Part of it is the dissociative nature that bipolar can have, as well as autism. We also don't have a lot of a filter when you're when you're not being careful. So after my dog licked my wounds, it brought me out of that panic. And it's like, oh, wait, this is not smart. Let me phone somebody to get help, to sit with me for a little while so I can get through this. So I phoned my fiance and like, no, 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 leave me alone. I'm like, come on, I'm in the middle of trying to kill myself here. Oh, don't bug me with these little high school problems that you have. I'm playing video games with the guys. That was what was important to him. So I phoned. Did I mention I had low self-esteem at the time? Just saying.
Yeah.
So I phoned an ex-boyfriend of mine who treated me like a queen when we were dating. I was not emotionally ready to be treated like that, but he treated me so, so well. And so I phoned him up, and he drove from 2 towns over, normally a 40-minute drive, and he got there in 20 minutes. I mean, he broke some land speed records. There you go. He wanted Edward to be autistic because their sisters had both been children on the spectrum. Yeah, when you know it, when you know what the disorder is, it's a lot easier to deal with than something you don't. So I phoned that guy. He came and he sat with me until my mom came home from work. I think I probably cried all night. And I don't remember him saying a word. We were sitting on the kitchen floor, shoulder to shoulder, and just sat for hours. And that's what I needed at the time. Sometimes people don't need wisdom. Sometimes they just need
somebody there.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So I didn't break up with that boyfriend at the time. Isn't that smart? And we dated until almost a year later. But in that period of time, I graduated high school, moved out of the small town where I was living, and this guy I had a kind of a crush on for a long time. Anyway, I had worked for his parents for the summer, and his mom's like, "Oh yeah, he's moving to Saskatoon this weekend." So I talked to my boyfriend who had a pickup truck. I'm like, "So 2 weeks ago, we helped this friend move from our town to a city about 6 hours away. This weekend, we took a different friend and moved her from our town to the city I want to move to. When do you think it is that we could be ready to move me to the city?" He's like, "What? Do I look like an effing moving truck?" Thank you. I appreciate your support.
Your support.
Exactly. So I told not quite all the details, but I told the bare bones of it to my employer, and she's like, "Well, my son's moving to the city this weekend before school starts. I had to go to start hair school beginning of September, and he was going to university. So she's like, he's taking a large truck and he doesn't have a lot of stuff. Would you be, would that help you?" I'm like, "Yes, please." And not only that, I got to spend time with this guy that I thought was the sweetest young man in the world. And I thought he would never even want to be friends with a person like me who had made all those terrible choices and who had lived such an awful life, who grew up with no meaning, with no, the word I'm looking for has escaped me. No worth, I guess.
No.
So we moved my stuff with his stuff. And on the way from our small town to the city, it was about a 3-hour drive, and I talked nonstop. That's another feature of having bipolar, being in a hypomanic state. You talk like this, and frankly, it's a little bit funny because, you're talking all the time, and everything is about right, except when, "Oh, there's a butterfly over there. That's so pretty. Okay." And then we're just talking this, and then, it's not like we're actually skipping from topic to topic. It's like my brain takes 5 leaps of logic before it can actually get out of my mouth. So it seems really random to you, but frankly, to me, it's just making all sense. That's what it's like to talk to somebody who's in manic or a hypomanic period of time. We talk a lot and we talk fast. So I told him my entire life story. I had no filter. I had no expectation of anything coming back to me simply because this was such a nice guy. Why would he ever want anything to do with me after this? And I was telling him all this terrible stuff. Basically, it's like, I dare you to like me. I dare you to be my friend. And so once we got to where I was moving into, he's like, I said, you must think I'm a terrible person. You must think I'm all these different names and such like that. And he says, no, I don't think you're a terrible person. I think you're a great person who's made some terrible mistakes. Like,
Wonderful.
excuse me? What are you talking about? Like, no, I think you're a great person who's had terrible life choices and terrible things put on you. So it's like, okay. And hearing that changed my life. It changed my life. It saved my life, probably. So I still dated the fellow I was engaged to, and, just this other guy was just a really nice guy, and we became really good friends. And finally, oh, exactly, my son would talk to me the whole time for a 4-hour drive. That's about right. So we became very good friends, and it got to the point, though, where my boyfriend, my fiance, he was a long haul truck driver, and he would tell me that he was going out of the city. He would be gone on a long haul trip for about a week, and he was going down to Virginia or whatever to live down and whatever. I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. And he wouldn't have left town at all. I found out later that he had been hanging out with the guys and, doing his thing. And I would find out that this had been going on for months. So it's like, okay, I really mean a lot to you, don't I? So I finally confronted him about it. Had a huge fight. And my mom was visiting me for the weekend. And I'm like, Mom, you need to go have coffee somewhere or do something, because we're going to have it out tonight. And you're not going to want to be around for it. She's like, well, what are you talking about? She had always taken his side in an argument anytime we had an argument before, because he's older than me and he's a guy, and, he's the leader of the family. So therefore he knows more, right? Yeah. So she's like, no, you need to do what you need to do. And I said, Mom, you're going to hear things about your little girl you never wanted to hear. She's like, that's okay. Nothing you say could make me not love you. So I'm like, okay, fine. So I sat on the side, and the guy and I, we were fighting back and forth. And at one point, he figured that the fight was because he had asked me to marry him, but we hadn't set any sort of date or anything like that. And he's like, so if you want to get married so bad, let's get married in a month. We'll be married, before whatever. And I'm like, no, that's not what I want anymore. I don't just want to be married. I want to be treated with respect. And I had all of these new standards that this young guy who listened to me before and we became good friends, he treated me with all of these things. And those were the standards I wanted suddenly. And this guy just was livid, absolutely livid, because I wasn't willing to bend to what he wanted again. And so by the time we were done screaming and fighting, my mom's sitting over on the couch, and she heard about the times that he had done things emotionally to me that would hurt me. A couple times we had broken up, and he stalked me one of the times, and so she got to hear about things like that. And she's, Kim, right now you want to just curl up in his lap, tell him you're sorry, and just ask him to forgive you and take you back. I said, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I want. She looked at me straight in the eye and said, don't you dare.
Good mama.
Good mama. When my parents split up, she and I were all each other had. And Tommy on the Life has talked about trauma bonding. And I hadn't thought of it this way until hearing Tommy talk about it. My mom and I trauma bonded. We were all each other had after this horrific life that we had spent together. And so we were so close, and we still are. So it's wonderful. But she said, don't you dare. this is not okay. So the guy freaked out. He left. He apparently went to a house party in a city about an hour and a half away. And when he got there, he punched the foundation of the house so hard it actually cracked the cement. The
Oh my
man was
goodness.
mad. So, anyway, but my mom says, so you really need to talk about this, don't you? I said, yeah, I need to call Doug. That was the friend that I had made. My brain didn't go to, I want to talk to the best friend I've had over the last how many years. My brain went to, I need to talk to the best friend that I have now that Bart belongs to. And so from the next day on, we were a couple, and that was 33 years ago.
Wow.
So, yeah.
When were you
We
officially diagnosed?
I wasn't diagnosed until our second daughter was almost a year old. She was 11 months old, and I went into another really bad depression. Only this time, I knew where that type of a depression had taken me in the past, and I knew I couldn't go there again because Doug's mom died when he was 6, and I knew that he didn't have a lot of memories with his mom. He didn't have the growing up period of time and the going to grad and all of these things that at that point going to a wedding that you know would have been really nice to do. So I'm like, nope, I cannot do that. But he figured that we love each other and we trust each other, and love will heal everything, because if we love each other enough, we can talk to each other. It's not like he was this other guy who was going to treat me badly. He was a great guy, and he was a great guy, still is a great guy. But I knew that it was more than what he could do. So I went to a therapist, and that therapist happened to be somebody that I had known from childhood. Um, when my dad was at college, this guy was one of the teachers at college, and we actually happened to be next door neighbors. My dad went to jail for having assaulted my sister for so many years. And when he got out of jail, there was court mandated counseling that he had to do. And this guy happened to be my dad's, shouldn't be happened to be, this guy ended up being my dad's counselor for a period of time. And then I went to the office where this guy worked, and I'm like, hi, can you be a counselor? He's like, I probably shouldn't. I'm like, why? Because I know too much about you. There's something called transference. There's a whole pile of stuff to do with not knowing each other out of the office so that it doesn't color the perception. And I'm like, well, do you think you could be objective when talking to me? He said, yeah. I said, okay. And I know I don't have to explain my entire life to you and have you go, did that really happen?
Yeah.
Or is this something she's making up? So he's like, yeah, no. So he ended up being my therapist because I didn't have to explain the rest of my life to him. He knew exactly what I was talking about.
Which was, in retrospect, probably very helpful.
Oh, forget retrospect. Even at the time, it was like, hallelujah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And during a period of time before Doug and I had kids, we had both walked away from God. Neither of us said that God wasn't real, that God didn't exist, that God, whatever. We just acted like he just didn't matter. And so once we had kids, we had this discussion that, we really do need to get back to the basics, because I know what is right. You know what is right. This is where we need to be. So we had been going to church and stuff like that. And that was the other, if we could pray about it, that was the other thing. If we could pray about it, God would be able to fix it all. Like, yeah, no, I've been doing that for years. Hadn't helped. And this counselor was Christian. He was a Christian counselor.
Which is a good fit.
It was a great fit.
Yeah.
Not all Christian counselors are.
Yes.
Let me tell you. The counselors that I had when I was a teenager living in our small town, my mom and I went to one guy, and I saw him once, and I told him everything, and he gave me a few scriptures to look at. And he's like, okay, and I'll see you in about a week. And I saw him a week later, and we talked about the scriptures, and he's like, well, it sounds like you have a good handle on things. I don't think you need to come back. Like, excuse me?
I would have said the same thing.
Well, exactly. But I mean, suddenly I'm like, okay, so obviously what I think doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It just reinforced the you don't matter thing. And so there was that. That sucked. Fortunately, like I said, the next time I had a Christian counselor, it was this other guy who was amazing. And he gave, between my doctor checking out physical reasons for certain behaviors and stuff like the depressions and the manias and all of that stuff. So checking my thyroid levels and checking other brain functions and stuff like that. Then there was this 300 question or so questionnaire to fill out. I had to fill one out. My mom had to fill one out. Doug filled one out. And between the three of us, it was a really good spectrum of what my life was really like, and how I would react to things. My perception of how I would react, their perception how I would react.
That's an interesting way of doing it.
It was, and that's exactly what they're supposed to do, apparently.
Yeah.
At least that's what I was told at the time.
Well,
So
I remember when one of my grandmother's children and I were talking, and she was saying, "Oh, I had a great mom," and I'm like, "Are we talking about the same lady?"
yeah,
Because do you not remember this and this and the stories that I know that happened? I'm like, we can't be talking about the same individual.
yeah,
So, my grandmother was married and divorced 4 times.
yeah,
And she could go from very cool and collective to screaming and yelling, in just a matter of seconds.
yeah.
It was like if I spilled tea on her cabinet or her table, she just would let off with every name in the book to me.
Mm-hmm.
And she was very unpredictable, but then I heard stories that when she was raising her other children, that she would go off to bed and leave these, small children in this playpen and sleep all day, and they would just be in the playpen with dirty diapers and everything. I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't, it was like, how did, you know what I mean?
Exactly. And that is very, very typical. There's one that I didn't mention. It's called cyclothymic. So for bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, there's a period of time that things will happen. So you'll be high, 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 low, 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 but it's not a straight drop from high to low. There's frequently a period of time of what's called euthymia, or just regular living. Okay. Cyclothymia is you are up, down, up, down, up, down. Sometimes, like you said, it's a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
Sometimes a matter of like a day. This day you're really great. The next day it's like, these are the really, really super unpredictable people. And so like you can have a time of cyclothymia within either one of these diagnoses, or you can just be pure cyclothymic like that. So I had forgotten to talk about that. And that's what you're talking about. And that's like what you were talking about with your grandma, getting you up in the middle of the night to watch Elvis.
And
And that is,
it was like,
but that's exactly what somebody with bipolar would do. Like, oh, this is a good idea. This is fun. Let's do it.
yeah.
She'll love this.
Oh,
Forget the consequences, like you have to go to school the next day.
well, when we used to go to Daytona, I'd walk in her house and I would smell. She always had a pot of spaghetti and sauce on the sauce that was cooking all day, and the spaghetti. And my dad was adopted by her third husband, and his dad just walked away and gave up the rights, which today would not be allowed because my dad was 6 by then. So he always felt like his dad had been abandoning him. I'm calling this person dad one day, and then I'm supposed to call this foreigner, dad another day. And I was told that by my grandfather's, I call him grandpa, second wife, that she was afraid of my grandmother. And I'm like, well, I can totally understand why. My grandmother's mother died very young. And so I think that had an impact, because I've heard that bipolar, that sometimes can be there, but when something traumatic happens, it tends to come out in full,
Oh,
you know.
absolutely. Yeah,
And I think that that was probably what happened. I think the loss
that's
of her
exactly
mother
right.
at a very pivotal age may
Yep,
have done things.
totally.
You know, she used to call the phone up when my aunt would come down, and just, I mean, it was horrendous for 20 minutes. You've got to come back home and all this kind of stuff. Then
Yeah,
she called back 20 minutes later, like nothing happened. And I was like,
yeah,
which grandma are we going to
yeah, exactly.
get?
That's
And it
exactly
was
right.
difficult.
It is. It's really difficult. So when my girls were like, my girls are only 14 months apart. So when my older daughter was 2, my younger daughter was almost 1. Um, this depression happened. I got diagnosed, started with therapy, started going on medication, got my first psychiatrist, who actually ended up becoming head of the department of psychiatry. She had to drop me as a patient because she was going to be the head of the department. So, I mean, God has blessed me so much in my medical journey as an adult, right? Um, and then a whole pile of other things happened. But to look at what happened when I was younger and what the choices I made and the things that happened to me when I was younger, I don't regret any of it. Not a thing, because I am who I am today because of that. Not in spite, because. And I can talk to young women who are going through all sorts of different problems and choices and things like that. I can talk to women in women's shelters and tell them how brave they are for having left, because my mom didn't know that she could do that until it was forced upon her to leave. So, I mean, I'm able to talk to these people with compassion and empathy and, hopefully give them hope that life can be good, even after a diagnosis of mental illness. If anything, it's going to be better. Because, once I started to become more stable and stuff, my husband wanted to send my psychiatrist flowers. He became my number one advocate for medical psychiatric help. It
Yeah.
was it was night and day when it came to that. It was wonderful. So yeah, that's my basic backstory of bipolar.
I mean, I think that it saddens me
Hmm.
for my grandmother, because she didn't get the treatment that she needed.
Yeah,
And she had 4 children. She had a set of twins that were stillborn, so she had 6 altogether. She had 4 marriages. My uncle unalived himself in his early 20s. And she was abusive. I think she tried to stabilize herself in better ways,
yeah,
through drug use and everything,
yeah,
to mentally keep her stable.
yeah.
But I mean, my several, except for my dad, and I don't know if it was just because of, I don't know, but she didn't have a problem with drugs and alcohol, but the remainder of her children did. And I think he
Right.
didn't get as much neglect and treatment as the rest of them did, because his grandparents were very heavily involved in his
Mm,
life in a way that didn't happen for the other children, I think. And I
right.
said to my mom, "Did you notice anything with grandma?" And she said, "No, I didn't. I didn't really see it till it started to unfold."
Right.
Um, but I just remember spilling a cup of that tea, and she just exploded.
Yeah.
And I ran out of her house just crying, like, why do I deserve to be called all these names over just a cup of tea?
Exactly.
And
Yep.
when my one aunt was very small, young, I mean, the beach, she lived on Daytona Beach, so where she lived was like a walk to the beach. She let this 5-year-old child go walking to the beach by herself. Like,
How long ago was this?
this was of course, my my aunt is much older now, but this
Okay,
was when
so it
she
would have
was.
been in the days.
It
Yeah,
was still in the 70s, I think, or
yeah,
no, in the 60s. But I'm still thinking, even in the 60s, you're going to let a 5-year-old child go to the beach by themselves because she'd rather have been
yeah,
sleeping.
yeah,
It's not a
exactly.
healthy mental thing.
Nope, it's not.
I was told that my dad, in order to avoid messes, she would take a diaper and put it around him in his high chair so that he could have his hands held down and he didn't make any mess.
Oh my.
So some of the behaviors were so outlandish of you
Yeah,
know of
but to her, they were logical.
yes,
It made sense. Well, you don't want you to make a mess. This is what you do. You want to be
yes,
able to have a nap. You want your child to be able to play. She's 5. She knows how to walk. She knows where she's going. Let her go.
yeah.
Like
There's
that's
to my brain it wasn't.
no,
um
exactly. Yeah.
she was a diabetic. I'm not sure when she got diabetes, but she was a diabetic, and when I was 16 years old,
Mm-hmm.
I look back at this memory now with a great sense of thank you, Lord, because it changed the directory of our relationship. And I
Mm-hmm.
was standing in my aunt's house and I was trying to get her to calm down, which was not
Okay.
something that was unusual.
Right.
And my dad was doing something for my aunt. And I said, Grandma, just calm down. It's okay. Dad'll be with you in a minute. She just looked at me as straight as she is. And she said, why don't you just go to HE double
Mm-hmm.
sticks? I just
Mm-hmm.
looked at her and I said, you coming with me? But I was so mad with her.
Oh yeah,
How
for
dare
sure.
she tells her grandchild, I'm her, well, I'm not her first, but I'm the one, I'm the first. How dare she
Yeah.
sits there and tells me at 16?
Yeah.
And the next day, we were going off to lunch before we left. My dad and I left, and she wanted me to drive her car, and I didn't want to do it. I didn't want anything to do with it. I don't
Mm.
want to talk to you. I don't want to see you. And she said, if
Mm-hmm.
you don't do this, I'm going to do so and so. And I can't remember what it was. And I got in the car and I drove home, which was about 4 hours away. And I just screamed and yelled the entire time at my dad.
Yeah.
And I said to my mom, I am done. If I never have anything to do with her ever again, I'm
It'll be
just
too
done.
soon.
I've had it. I'm
Yeah.
over it. I'm done. And all my aunts and my mother and my dad all were on my side. This is not okay for you to tell your grandchild
No.
this. And she called me up and she apologized to me. And we had the best 2 years that I ever had with my grandmother. I put boundaries up, but I just said, Grandma, I'm not going back. If you can't, we got to stop this. And
Yeah.
and I don't know whether it was the Lord working in her life. She was a Christian. I don't know what it was, but God gave me that peace where she would call me up and talk to me for like an hour.
Yeah.
And we just had this really peaceful relationship for the first time in my 16 years of life. And I chose to forgive her. And then she had
That's
a
big.
stroke and was in her bathroom for several days
Oh
before she was found.
no. Oh
And
no.
2 weeks later, she was gone. So
Yeah.
I chose to forgive her. And then I was able to get to know her. But she still suffered with it.
Yeah.
And I say suffered because she never got any help for it.
Exactly. And back then it was just somebody was touched or somebody was just moody, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah. No, there
My
are
dad,
different, sorry,
go ahead.
yes.
No, go ahead.
There's several different they don't know exactly what causes bipolar disorder or quite a few other mental illnesses. The leading, like 80% or more people believe that it is biological. You will have times when you will not have a history of a mental illness, or at least not one that was diagnosed, like Mary had grandmother. But 9 times out of 10, somebody in your immediate family or like 1 or 2 generations away will have had a mental illness of some sort. And so I have a mental illness, my sister does, but we don't have the same one. Mine showed up at a different time that my sister's did. Biologically, we had the predisposition for a mental illness. We have a stepsister who, not a stepsister, a half sister, sorry, who is 4 months older than me, 18 months younger than my older sister, and she does not have a mental illness. The same carrier, my dad, was the same biological person. So the abuse my sister suffered, the abuses I suffered, the head injury that I had, those are triggers for mental illness. They're not the cause. So our sister who currently lives in Australia had the same root DNA, but she didn't have the same triggers we did. So your grandma would have had triggers along her way that, she had this mental capacity for it, but something happened along her way that caused it just to click right in there. So
my dad didn't have bipolar where he got depressed, but he could go from really calm, cool, and collected to angry within seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like,
yeah,
right
off the handle. Yep.
And he was never diagnosed with bipolar. Anxiety, yes.
Okay, yeah.
But he would do like she did, where she would flip, but where her difference was the fact that she got depressed. I know she battled with depression.
Yeah.
And
for me, sorry,
Miss Dragon, when you're saying that you forgave, you haven't forgiven, then that has to be in your mother for the abuse. I haven't forgotten it. No, you don't forget it, but forgiving gives you power back. That's
right. Forgiving doesn't mean it's okay what they did. It means that you are releasing their power over you to hurt you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a picture of I don't know if anybody can see it real clear. That's my grandmother. So she looks perfectly normal. And that's my dad. And all curly hair. And that's my grandpa. That is the only picture I have of them together.
Oh, wow.
Because there wasn't many pictures. I'm sure there was a lot of fights that happened between them. I think that even, and I looked at it, and I think that's probably why for Christina, I didn't question bipolar, because it was in our family.
Yeah.
There's another illness called,
there's another illness called borderline personality disorder. And borderline personality disorder looks a lot like cyclothymia. Okay, it looks a lot like that, up, down, up, down, up, down. One of the biggest differences, if you look at my Mental Health Mondays, I have recently talked about borderline personality. And one of the biggest differences between borderline personality and bipolar is that their mood switches like on a dime. And there isn't a time of low or a time of high. It is all high, all low. There isn't really much in between. As well, they have a level of self-harm that most people with bipolar don't have. Not everybody, but most people with bipolar will maybe attempt suicide, maybe think about it. But somebody with borderline personality will have this urge for pain, and that being the self-soothing method that they will use. And so that's something I don't understand. I don't like pain. Pain does not interest me at all.
I avoid it at all costs.
Pretty much.
And I think looking at and knowing my knowledge of my grandmother, that is one of the things that really fascinated me about Elvis, was if you look at his life and listen to the stories, his bodyguards used to say he could hire and fire within seconds. He stayed, for days on end. He had insomnia. He used
Mm-hmm.
drugs in order. It was never illegal. It was always prescription to level himself out, to put him up, to put
Right.
him down.
Right.
He had the sexual part of his behavior. He'd hand out money. All those kind of things say that most likely he suffered from it.
Yeah.
But again, it wasn't diagnosed. And back then, stars like him that were diagnosed with that, their career was over with.
If they weren't able to handle it and they didn't
Yeah.
have people around him to handle him, right?
Yeah. And
So,
his
yeah,
mother passed away at a very pivotal time. And they said he was just devastated by his mother's passing. And I think that if
absolutely.
you think of where that may have taken the turn was, I think, right then. But,
Yeah,
I think he was probably undiagnosed bipolar, which is not probably
probably.
very favored in the Elvis community, but it
Well, back
is.
then, back then the diagnosis would only land him in the loony bin. And
Yeah,
there's no better word. It's not a psych hospital. It was a loony bin
exactly.
because there was such limited medication. And he might have been lobotomized. He might have had to have electric convulsive therapy, not in the same, like ECT still happens now, but it is like a billion times more
Yeah.
effective and easier on the body and the brain and all of that. I have friends who cannot live without ECT. They get it at least once every 2 months.
I have a family member that they consider it bipolar schizophrenia.
It's called
And
schizoaffective disorder is the two combined. Yeah.
and it's challenging.
Yeah.
And what happens to, I know that I've heard from not a lot of people, but the people within my life is as long as they're on the medication, they're fine, but they get to a point where they don't think they need it.
Yep.
And then they get off of it and think they're
Yep.
fine. And then they start down a spiral.
And then when they try to go back on it, they have to go on higher and higher and higher levels. What I tell people is when you're on a psych medication and you're feeling better, do not try to get off without your doctor because it means that it's working. It does not mean that you're cured. So, yeah.
I look back at her life and realize the ripple effect it created, undiagnosed
Yeah.
and untreated. It not only affected her life, but it affected her children's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, her grandchildren's lives, because the way that my dad was treated and the way that he lived his life, I got the aftermath of it, and
Absolutely.
it was very difficult. I mean, he could just, and I was in a therapist session recently, and my therapist is like, "Do you realize where this is going back to? Your dad."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I didn't even, she said, there are so many connections back to your dad.
Yeah.
She said, a lot of your stuff goes back to him because of all the stuff. And it just, he lived on such an anxious thing. I will say that I said to him, Dad, I want to meet my grandfather, which was my only living grandfather. I am going on Surviving Together to talk about what is considered SA. And I'll tell that part of the story there. But I said, I want to meet him. And he said, well, I don't want anything to do with him, because he felt like his dad abandoned him. I mean, they would never allow a 6-year-old today to have the dad just walk away.
Actually, they do.
Well,
you're allowed to sign away your parental rights at any time. At least in Canada, you are allowed.
But to not have the counseling put in place. He didn't have any counseling for it. I mean, today, I'm sure if it was done, court order would require the child went through some kind of processing to do this.
One would hope.
Yes, it should. Yeah. There was none of that. So he felt like his dad didn't love him. He felt like he was abandoned by his dad, and that wasn't the case. Now, his dad went off, got married, had 8 other children.
Oh my.
And, lived a perfectly life, and his son was kind of over here. And and so I said, I really want to meet him. And he said, well, that's fine. But he said, I want nothing to do with it. Don't tell me, don't anything. Well, I called him and we talked for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And so then he said, "Do you think my son would talk to me?" And I said, "Well, you can try." And he called him. He
Yeah.
remembered what his birthday was, and he called him and he said, this is your dad." And they talked for like 2 hours.
Oh,
What happened
wow.
in the process of that is their relationship started healing. And
Yes.
he would talk, and he would call him up because then he had a stroke, and at one point he was in like a nursing home, and he would come, and the nurse would say, Bucky, Chuck's on the phone.
Mhm.
He's, I'm coming after my son. So there was just this
Yeah.
wonderful healing. And then
Yes.
my granddaddy, which was his adopted father, and my grandfather lived very near to each other. So we went
Mhm.
up and visited my granddaddy, and in the process we went and saw my grandpa for the first time.
Mm.
And I was sitting across the table thinking, these two are so alike. My dad was like,
Mhm.
"Oh, well, nothing's a piece of cake." And then he would say it, and back and forth. It was wonderful. And then it was just a great time. And then he passed away shortly after that. I remember going to his like the side of his bed, and he just said to me, "Come here." And I came over, and he goes, "I love you." I was like, "I don't need any more."
I'm done.
And his wife at the time said, "Do you know how precious that is? Because he never says I love you to anybody."
Wow.
And I was like, "God, you don't have
That's
to give me anything
beautiful.
else." But it made the difference in my dad, because then there was
Oh, yeah.
healing. There was a
Yeah.
lot of misconceptions on why he left. He
Mm.
didn't leave
Mhm.
because he didn't love his son. He left it because he was scared to death of my grandmother, who was suffering from a mental illness that nobody took action to
Nobody
take care
realized.
of.
Yeah. They didn't know they could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, I sorry for all that she had to go through, but it is livable if it's properly diagnosed and medicated.
Right. Right. Over the years, I've been around people well, one group of people I know they didn't know I had a mental illness. The other group did know. They just didn't know the effect that it would have. And in this first group was a group of women. We all lived on the same block. We had this wonderful community, and we would get together once a month for desserts and coffee and that kind of stuff. And at one point, the conversation came around to a friend of one of the ladies, and they're like, "Oh, this poor wife has to put up with, or no, this poor husband has to put up with so much. She's, she does this, 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 and this, and and she has bipolar disorder, and he has to put up with so much. And can you imagine what it's like living with somebody who has bipolar disorder and so on?" And I'm like, "Excuse me, I have bipolar disorder. Imagine what it's like to have your brain do that and have no control over it. You don't have a choice that you're flipping out. You don't have a choice to be depressed. You don't have the choice to be laughing the top of your head off. Those aren't choices. That's the
Oh,
chemistry in
no.
your brain that's disordered." And they kind of all went silent. The hostess that night was in the kitchen when I said that, and she pulled me for a big, big hug. She says, "Thank you for saying something, because I have bipolar as well. And I didn't have the guts to say anything." So be careful when you're talking about somebody who's the family member of somebody with a
Yeah.
mental illness. Yeah, it is terrible, terrible for that family member. But imagine what it's like being in your own brain and not being able to control it.
I
That is one
can
of the scariest things.
I can look with as her granddaughter, I can look and think, my heart goes out to Nancy. That was her name.
Mm,
And I think she's with the Lord. She's out of pain and suffering now. But
hmm.
as a granddaughter, I can look and say, I am so sorry you had to go through that.
Yeah,
And I'm so sorry that all her children had to go through that.
yeah,
Because she did a beautiful paint. She did painting at one point. She had a bookstore. She was a really neat lady, but the part of her that was hard was you just didn't know who you were going to get
that's right. And
until it was
you
flipped.
inherited from her the soft heart that she probably had, just
Yeah.
didn't know how to use.
Yeah,
right?
soft heart was she was a doozy. Soft
Hmm.
heart is not something that I totally remember from her.
Okay.
Um, I think you saw it that night she woke me up. I think that that's
Right.
one thing that I remember. Or
Yep.
when I remember one time she came down, and I was allergic to dogs. And
Mm.
so she just came down, and without even saying anything to my dad, she said, "We're going to the pound to getting married a dog." And my dad just looked at her and he said, "Mom, she's allergic. She can't have dogs." 'Cause she thought my allergies were all in my head. Um,
Right.
and she just said, where she said, my dad was like, "We can't go and get her a dog. She can't have dogs. I can have them now, but I couldn't have them then."
Okay.
And so she was all upset because she couldn't go to the pound to get me a dog, but she loved playing bingo. And so she
Oh.
won this huge dog, stuffed animal dog at bingo. And I was the recipient of this dog because she wanted to make sure that I had a dog. She said, "I can't give you a
Yes.
real one, but here's one you can have."
Oh, see,
I
now
don't know
that's the
whatever
type of
happened to that
heart I'm
dog, but
talking
she gave me
about.
that dog,
That's
you
the
know.
soft heart I'm talking about. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the I don't know if anybody can see it, but my wedding band um is the gold one that's on there is the one that she married my grandfather with. So it is one
Mm.
that I have, and then my actual ring was designed by my grandmother.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so it's been
Very
kind of passed
creative.
down, but it was their original wedding band that I wear
Yeah.
on my finger. So she's always here, even
Yep.
though she's not here. And
I'm
one
going to
day
tell
I
you.
will get to know
Go
her
ahead. Yeah, and one day
without
you
all that
will.
stuff.
You'll be able to get to know her and you have the eternity to do it,
Yeah.
right? So some things that people don't realize are bipolar disorder. You know that artistic temperament where like things are just so beautiful and wonderful and then they just can't. And then things are beautiful and wonderful and creative and then they just can't. That's bipolar disorder. The artistic temperament is bipolar disorder. Those CEOs that go, 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 and then suddenly they have um, not a mental breakdown, but a word I'm looking for has escaped me. Basically, they just shut down and they need burnout. That's right. So then they have this burnout for maybe 6 months. Then they come back and they go, 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 go. That's bipolar disorder. Exhaustion sabbatical. Yeah, that's exactly it. Sometimes sabbatical is, well, I shouldn't say sometimes. A sabbatical generally is a planned thing, but that exhaustion, that I just literally cannot get my butt out of bed. I've actually even heard recently about a guy who couldn't even get his butt out of bed to go to the bathroom. So
Oh
he'd
goodness.
miss himself in the bed. And then after however long, he would have to clean himself up because he was single. Can you imagine living like that? That's not a choice.
No,
That is
and putting your
not a
kid in a
choice.
playpen and not going to take care of their diaper isn't a choice either.
That's right.
And I don't
Yeah.
think that this will the only discussion we will have, because I think it is so wide and
Mm-hmm.
so broad, but we felt that
Mm-hmm.
the nuts and bolts of it, and I think as our channel grows, and I did put a lifeboat and I put my other's keeper. We're back and forth. We're trying to figure out how, when we
Yeah.
are on each other's channels, we can stream on each other's channels.
We're trying.
We're trying to figure all that out without,
Yes.
under, but
Yep.
I really think that we're going to have more on this and more topic, and especially as both of our channels grow,
Yes.
because living with it, but not only having to love somebody, it is just
Yes. Exactly.
especially it's hard if it's a friend, but when it's your family member, when it is your grandmother, neither one of my grandmothers, God love them both, did I ever have this really. I had a relationship, but not my say to my daughter, "You are so blessed." to
Right.
have such an amazing relationship with my mother in a way that I
Yeah.
didn't have with either grandmothers.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and it's really hard when you don't know which one you're going to get to say, oh yeah, I can warm up to this person.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what makes
Or
it difficult.
or you don't know when it's time to hide.
Yeah.
Like not hide like in, well, maybe sometimes hide in fear, but just kind of make yourself scarce so that you're not,
What
you
mood
know,
is she going to be in?
exactly. Yeah. And
You
that's
don't know what you're
even
getting.
when my girls were little, like how I would walk in through the front door when they were home. They knew how to react to me. I would walk in and sometimes go, hello. So you'll notice when I come online, I'll HELLOOOO, hello. That's what that is. Um, and or I would come in and I would see them mess around me and I would start screaming. And that's with treatment. I can't imagine what I would have been like without it. I cannot imagine. And I'm so grateful that I don't do.
Well,
I know what it was like.
I'm
And
glad
I'd
you're still
never want
here.
to go back.
I'm
Pardon?
glad you're still here.
Oh, me too. Me
And I'm
too.
glad I've made you as a friend.
Me too.
I've just been
Yes.
so blessed. And, everybody that's coming in and may watch this on the replay, reach out for help. My Other's Keeper has a lot of wonderful content. And if she gives me other resources, I will put them in the description below. We will have other discussions about what it's like, but let's not forget how important connection is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm realizing that in so many ways. And I said to a friend today, I'm having to realize I have people that I can go to. Not that
Yeah.
my husband and my mom and my daughter aren't wonderful, but I have people that I can go to say, I really want to have something in the refrigerator, but I need to go
Mm-hmm.
talk to somebody versus doing something and eating something that is not going to help me. And so
Right.
the lifeboat is there. They have wonderful connection. We're trying to expand the amount of channels that can give connection because it really does change lives in so
It
many
does.
ways.
Absolutely.
I will be trying to do tomorrow's Easter, so I will be on.
He is
So
risen
happy.
indeed, baby.
But I will be on Monday to discuss food addiction because it's something that I struggle with. And something that I think is an important topic. I reach out to anybody that is an expertise in it that would love
Mm-hmm.
to come on and discuss strategies and things and so forth
Mm-hmm.
that can help. I will
Mm-hmm.
gladly have people that want to do that.
Yep.
So I thank you so much. Kim will be back on. This is not her only stop. I have
And
shows to catch up from.
I have not been watching the chat at all. So if something struck you, if there's more you want to talk about or tell me your story, please get in touch with me at myotherskeeperis@gmail.com. So myotherskeeperis@gmail.com. And I would love to talk to you privately. Yeah, either privately or up on one of my broadcasts or something like that, and tell your story, tell your side of the story. And instead of me talking for 45 minutes, I'll listen. I love listening. I'm not kidding. I would rather listen to somebody else than talk about myself.
Well, you did a
Honestly.
good job tonight.
Well, okay.
And I was privileged that I think, the first one you've done. So I was thrilled to be able to do it. And
Yes. This is the first time I've ever sat and told this much of my story all at once. And I
Friday,
probably will do it.
you all should come and have fun with us.
Yes.
Because I'm up
Trivia.
next for the trivia questions. We do game time.
Yep.
So I'm up for trivia next, but she does it on her
Actually,
channel on Fridays.
You're doing trivia, are you? On yours? Or just me?
That's what you told me.
Yep. Okay. So what we've
You
been
said I
doing is
was up for the
going
trivia
through
questions.
Balderdash. We've been going through
Okay.
Balderdash, and each card has 5 categories, And so we'll go through it. And because I want to play too, I'll put my hand on the back of it. And then we'll go through each of these 5 categories. And then everybody will make their guess. And either it's correct or funny. You pick.
Maybe you were telling me I needed to be in trivia next week.
I think that's probably it. Yes.
So Rhonda, thank you so much. You're welcome. We're glad to do this, and we'll be back. I really enjoy being on Kim's channel, and I enjoy having her on mine. So thank you, everybody, for joining. I don't know if there's any lifeboat tonight, but I want to hop off so that people have a chance to go over to the lifeboat. But have a good night.
Have a good night.
Please realize there's support and there's help and there's connection out there. You do not need to live, or as my grandmother did, suffer from bipolar. It is a livable and functional mental illness, but we have to talk about it. We have to shine light on it.
It needs to be treated.
What did you say? I'm sorry.
It needs to be treated.
Yes.
That's the long and the short of it.
Yeah. Because all it is, it's just the chemicals aren't right, and they need to come in and adjust them chemicals.
Yep.
But happy Easter, everybody. Have a blessed night. And remember, God doesn't make junk. He makes beauty, and he gives us support and friends and connections that are such a blessing. So have a good night, everybody. Thanks for stopping by.
See you on the lifeboat.
And stay connected.
You heard what she said.